$30,000. That was the prize. All you had to do was hit 5 steel plates at 500 yards in 90 seconds. The rangemaster stood there with his arms crossed, watching young shooters burn through magazines, missing by feet. Then an old man in a red jacket stepped up to the line. The rangemaster actually laughed. He said, and I quote, "Gramps, maybe try the pistol range instead." This isn't bingo night. The old man didn't respond. He just adjusted his worn baseball cap and waited his turn. What happened in the next 58 seconds would leave everyone at that range absolutely speechless. His name was Frank Morrison, 72 years old, white hair, white beard, that faded red jacket he wore over a plain grey shirt. His hands had the slight tremor that comes with age. His face carried that perpetual sadness, that serious expression of someone who had seen things most people only read about in history books. He lived alone in a small apartment on the edge of town. His neighbors knew him as the quiet old man who fed stray cats and never caused trouble. What they didn't know was that Frank Morrison had been a Marine Corps scout sniper. 2 tours in Vietnam. Instructor at Quantico for 15 years after that. But he never talked about it, never wore the hat, never displayed the medals gathering dust in a shoebox under his bed. The shooting competition had drawn competitors from 6 states. Young men with expensive rifles, custom optics, tactical gear that cost more than Frank's monthly rent. They strutted around the range like peacocks, talking about their groupings and their equipment. The buy-in was $500, winner takes all, $30,000 in cash. Frank had scraped together that entry fee from his veteran's disability check. He needed it. His landlord had just raised the rent again. When Frank approached the registration table, the woman behind it actually hesitated. She looked him up and down, taking in his threadbare jacket, his worn jeans, his old boots with the sole coming loose. "Sir, are you sure you want to enter? It's $500, and it's non-refundable." Frank just slid the cash across the table. 5 $100 bills. Probably the last money he had until next month. The woman shrugged and took it. The course was brutal. 5 steel plates, each 1 foot square, positioned at 500 yards. You had 90 seconds from the first shot. The wind was gusting to 15 miles per hour. The mirage was dancing off the desert floor. Professional shooters were taking 2, 3, sometimes 4 shots per plate. Most were running out of time. A few hit 3 plates. One guy, a former Army Ranger half Frank's age, managed 4 plates in 87 seconds. The crowd cheered. The Ranger pumped his fist. He was in the lead. Frank waited patiently at the back of the line. He had brought his own rifle. A beat-up Remington 700 that looked like it had been through a war. Because it had. The stock was scratched and dented. The bluing was worn off in places. The scope was an old loophole that was probably older than most of the competitors. When Frank set up at the firing line, the rangemaster walked over. This was the same guy who had made the bingo comment earlier. He looked at Frank's rifle and actually scoffed. "That thing even zeroed, old-timer. We've got a chrono station if you want to make sure it's still shooting straight." Frank's response was barely audible. "It's fine." His voice was soft, almost a whisper. That sad, serious expression never changed. The rangemaster shook his head and walked away muttering something about liability waivers. Behind Frank, some of the younger shooters were snickering. One of them said loud enough for everyone to hear, "This is going to be embarrassing. Someone should have stopped Grandpa at the door." Another one laughed. "I give him 30 seconds before he gives up." Frank settled into position behind his rifle. He didn't rush. He checked the wind flags. He looked through his scope, studying the mirage. His breathing slowed. Those trembling hands suddenly became absolutely steady. The rangemaster stood next to him with a stopwatch. "Shooter ready." Frank nodded once. "Stand by." A pause then. "Your time starts with your first shot." The first shot broke the silence like thunder. The leftmost plate rang out and swung back on its chain. 4 seconds. The bolt cycled smoothly, like Frank had done it 1,000,000 times before, because he had. Second shot. The next plate sang. 8 seconds. The crowd had gone quiet. Third shot. Another hit. 12 seconds. The young shooters had stopped laughing. Fourth shot. The fourth plate spun backward. 16 seconds. The final plate clanged and twisted. 20 seconds flat. But Frank didn't stop. He cycled the bolt again and fired a 6th shot. It hit the first plate again, dead center. Then a 7th shot on the second plate. An 8th on the third. A 9th on the fourth. A 10th on the fifth. He had gone through all 5 plates twice. Every single shot a hit. When he finally set the rifle down and cleared the chamber, the range master looked at his stopwatch. His hand was shaking. 58 seconds, 10 shots, 10 hits. His voice cracked, all at 500 yards. The silence lasted maybe 3 heartbeats. Then someone started clapping, then another person, then the entire crowd erupted. But Frank just stood up slowly, his knees creaking. That same sad, serious expression. He started to walk away from the line. The rangemaster called after him, "Sir, wait, you won. You need to collect your prize." Frank turned back. "Mail it to me. I need to get home." That's when a black SUV pulled into the parking lot. The door opened, and out stepped a man in his 50s wearing a crisp Marine Corps dress uniform, lieutenant colonel rows of ribbons on his chest. He walked straight toward Frank with purpose. The crowd parted. When he reached Frank, he stopped and stood at attention. Then he saluted, a sharp, perfect salute. "Gunnery, Sergeant Morrison." Frank's face changed for the first time. "Come on." The sadness cracked. His eyes went wide. He slowly returned the salute, his hand trembling again. "Sir, I'm retired. You don't have to." The officer cut him off. "Gunny, I'm here because someone called me. They told me Frank Morrison was at this range. I had to see for myself." He turned to address the crowd. His voice carried authority. "Do you people know who this man is?" The crowd was silent, confused. The officer continued. "This man is a legend. Gunnery Sergeant Frank Morrison. 2 tours in Vietnam as a scout sniper. Confirmed kills I'm not at liberty to discuss. After Vietnam, he became the chief instructor at the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School at Quantico. He trained over 300 snipers. Some of them are still serving today. Some of them saved my life in Fallujah." The officer's voice wavered slightly. "One of his students, Sergeant Chen, put down an insurgent sniper who had my patrol pinned down. Chen told me everything he knew. He learned from Gunny Morrison." The range master had gone pale. The young shooters who had been laughing earlier couldn't meet Frank's eyes. The officer wasn't finished. Gunny Morrison holds the Marine Corps record for longest confirmed kill, set in 1969. That record stood for 34 years. He did it with iron sights and a rifle, not much different from the one he just shot with today. He paused. And after all that, after serving his country with distinction, after training the best of the best, he came home, and he never asked for anything. Never bragged, never demanded the respect he earned. One of the young shooters stepped forward. He was maybe 25, fit covered in expensive gear. His face was red. "Sir, I'm sorry. I didn't know. We didn't know." His voice broke. "I said things. We all did. We should have shown respect." Frank finally spoke, his voice still soft. "You didn't know. That's okay. I don't look like much anymore." The officer shook his head firmly. "Gunny, you look like exactly what you are. A warrior who earned his rest." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "Sir, I took the liberty of making some calls on the drive over. There's a group of your former students. We stay in touch. When I told them where you were, What you were doing? They wanted to contribute. He handed Frank the envelope. Open it. Frank's hands shook as he opened it. Inside was a check. His eyes widened. The officer explained, $50,000, Gunny, from the men you trained. The men whose lives you saved by teaching them to be the best. They wanted you to have it. No strings. No conditions. Just respect from the warriors you created. Frank's eyes filled with tears. That sad expression finally cracked into something else. Not quite a smile, but close. I can't accept this. The officer's voice became gentle but firm. Yes, Gunny, you can. And you will, because you earned it. Not today. Not with these 10 shots, as impressive as they were. You earned it over decades of service. You earned it every time one of your students came home alive because you taught them well. You earned it by being the kind of Marine who never stopped being excellent, even when nobody was watching. The Rangemaster stepped forward. He looked sick. Sir, Gunnery Sergeant, I owe you an apology. What I said earlier, it was disrespectful and ignorant. I'm sorry. Frank nodded slowly. You see a lot of old men who talk big and can't back it up. I understand. The Rangemaster shook his head. That's no excuse. I should treat every person at my range with respect until they prove they don't deserve it. Not the other way around. The woman from the registration table appeared with a bank envelope. 30,000 in cash. Sir, your winnings. Frank took it, looking overwhelmed. Between the prize money and the check from his former students, he was holding more money than he had seen in years. Maybe decades. The officer put a hand on his shoulder. Gunny, there's something else. We've been looking for you for months. The Marine Corps wants to do a proper ceremony. Award you some medals that got lost in the paperwork back in the day. Bring in some of your former students. Honor you the way you should have been honored 40 years ago. Frank's voice was barely a whisper. I don't need medals. The officer smiled. I know you don't, Gunny, but we need to give them to you. Not for you, for us. For every Marine who came after you. So they know what the standard is. So they see what quiet professionalism looks like. So they understand that the loudest voice in the room is rarely the most dangerous. One of the young shooters who had mocked Frank earlier approached hesitantly. He was carrying Frank's old rifle. Sir, I was wondering, could you maybe give me some pointers? I mean, if you have time. I know I don't deserve it after what I said, but I'd really like to learn from you. Frank looked at the young man for a long moment. Then he took the rifle. What's your name, son? The young man stood straighter. Derek, sir. Derek Patterson. Frank's voice was still soft, but there was something in it now. Authority. Decades of teaching. Derek, the first thing you need to learn is that shooting isn't about the equipment. It's about fundamentals, breathing. Trigger control. Reading the wind. Patience. He worked the bolt on his old rifle. This rifle is older than you are. The scope is probably worth less than your boots. But I know this rifle. I know exactly where it shoots at every distance. I know how it responds to temperature changes. I trust it because I've put in the time. Derek nodded, hanging on every word. Frank continued, You've got $5,000 worth of gear, and you hit 3 plates. I've got maybe $800 in this whole setup, and I hit 10. The difference isn't the gear, it's the fundamentals. Master the basics and the rest follows. He handed the rifle back. You want to learn? Start simple. Get a basic rifle. Learn it inside and out, shoot 1,000 rounds, then 2,000, then 10,000. Don't buy fancy equipment until you've outgrown the basics. The officer watched this exchange with obvious pride. That's the Gunny, I remember. Always teaching, always making Marines better. He turned to the crowd that had gathered. This is what a real professional looks like. Someone who has nothing to prove, but everything to teach. Someone who measures success not by how much noise he makes, but by the results he produces. Someone who treats a disrespectful kid with patience and turns it into a teaching moment. Frank looked uncomfortable with the attention. "Sir, I should really get going." The officer nodded. "Of course, Gunny, but you have my number now, and I'll be in touch about that ceremony. We're doing it whether you like it or not." Orders from the commandant himself. Frank's eyebrows rose. "The commandant," the officer grinned. "Turns out he was one of your students. Long time ago, he never forgot you." As Frank walked toward his old truck, parked at the far end of the lot, the entire crowd of shooters stood and watched. Several of them saluted, even though most had never served. The rangemaster called out, "Gunnery Sergeant Morrison, you have a lifetime membership to this range free, and I'd be honored if you'd come back and maybe do a clinic sometime. Teach these young guns how it's really done." Frank paused, looked back, and gave a small nod. The officer walked with him to his truck. "Gunny, seriously, don't be a stranger. There are a lot of people who want to thank you properly. A lot of Marines who owe you their lives, directly or indirectly." Frank opened the door of his beat-up Ford. "I just did my job, sir." The officer shook his head. "No, Gunny, did it better than anyone else. And you kept doing it, even when nobody was watching. Even when nobody knew. That's character." Frank climbed into his truck. Through the window, he said quietly, "Thank you for coming, sir. It means more than you know." The officer stepped back and saluted again. Frank returned it, started the engine, and drove away. The old Ford coughed and sputtered, but it ran. In the passenger seat sat 2 envelopes. $80,000 total. Enough to pay rent for years. Enough to fix his truck. Enough to stop worrying about money for the first time since he retired. Back at the range, Derek stood holding Frank's target. 10 holes. All of them within a 6-inch circle at 500 yards. He showed it to the other shooters. Nobody said a word. They just stared. The range master took the target and brought it inside. He hung it on the wall behind the counter with a handwritten sign. "Gunnery Sergeant Frank Morrison, USMC, age 72, 10 shots, 10 hits, 500 yards, 58 seconds. This is the standard." 3 weeks later, the ceremony happened at Quantico. Over 200 Marines attended. Frank wore his dress, blues tailored to fit his older frame. The commandant himself pinned on medals that should have been awarded decades ago. 37 of Frank's former students came from around the country. They stood in formation and saluted their old instructor. Some of them had tears running down their faces. Frank stood there in his uniform, ramrod straight, despite his age, that serious expression on his face, trying not to cry. After the ceremony, the students gathered around him. They told stories. Missions where his training had saved their lives. Shots they had made because he had taught them to read the wind. Patience they had learned because he had drilled it into them. One of them, a grizzled master sergeant, said it best. "Gunny, you taught us that being deadly doesn't mean being loud. It means being competent, patient, and professional. That lesson saved my life more times than I can count." The local news covered the ceremony. The story went viral. Suddenly, everyone knew about the old man in the red jacket, who could outshoot men a third his age. The range where the competition happened became a pilgrimage site for shooters. They all wanted to see the target on the wall. Some of them asked the rangemaster about Frank. He always told the same story, ending with the same lesson. Never judge someone by how they look, judge them by what they do. Frank went back to his quiet life, but it was different now. His landlord, a former army sergeant, found out who his tenant really was and cut his rent in half. The local VA clinic gave him priority treatment. Young Marines stationed nearby would sometimes knock on his door, asking for advice or just wanting to meet the legend. Frank always invited them in, always made time, always taught, and every few months he would go back to that range. He would set up his old Remington 700, settle in behind it, and put rounds down range. The tremor in his hands would disappear. That sad expression would fade into focus, and he would shoot. Not to prove anything, not to show off, just to maintain the standard. Because that's what professionals do. They stay sharp, they stay ready, they stay excellent, even when nobody's watching. Especially when nobody's watching.